Hello and welcome. My name is Sarah Seidelman and I am here with the lovely Max Daniels. Hello, Max.
Hello.
And Max and I go way back. She is also a Martha Beck trained life coach. And we got to know each other. And I remember when I first met her, I got one of her business cards, which was so amazing. And it said simply on the back, keep calm and ask for more. And everyone's thinking that is like the greatest possible like tagline ever. That idea that it's okay to ask for more, and the best way to like live life is to stay calm or keep calm, but cultivate ways to do that. So Max is here, and she's really a specialist in helping people, men too, women.
It's almost all women, but men too. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So humans who feel like their eating is out of control, or maybe they're overeating despite the fact that they've said, I don't want to overeat anymore, and it's still continuing to happen. And right before we got on the call, I was saying to Max, this is such a perfect topic because, as many of you know, in the fall, I just found myself like about 3 p.m. every day, sort of face down in a bowl of muesli. I would come home from work, not really aware of anything that was happening. First, I would have a handful of chocolate chips, not hungry. I'd just eaten my lunch. And then I would be face down in a bowl of muesli. But I identified the pattern. That's what the good thing is. And I decided this was going to be the year of being impeccable with myself in terms of, taking good care of myself and trying to figure out what was going on with me. So Max, if I came to you and said, gosh, I've identified this pattern of where I am face down in a bowl of muesli, but I know something's up and I don't want to do this anymore. It doesn't feel right. I know I'm overfeeding myself because my body didn't need that food. I wasn't hungry at all.
Mm-hmm.
There was something else going on with me.
Well, I think the popular approach, and the one that I do not take, is to say, what's the real need? And let's try and see if we can meet the real need. I don't bother with that at all. I think it's much faster to take a mechanical approach. So there are two things that I do. When somebody is binging or a bingey eater, like we all have a different definition for the word binge, and I'm not talking about clinical binge eating disorder, although my feeling about that is that the method that I use will work for that too. Like if you meet clinical definitions, I think you should give this a try. But however you define binge or bingey, I would just say any kind of out of control eating. The first part of what I offer is just to give people permission to eat. And this isn't new, but you would be surprised by how many people I work with that do not eat meals. And this is super common in the English-speaking countries. Like this is not so common in countries with like intact food cultures. Like you would not find this in Japan. You wouldn't find it in Mexico. You wouldn't find it in France or Italy. Like people sit down, they eat meals. Food is prioritized, right?
And that makes sense. And I'm just going to interrupt for a second because you told me I should interrupt. So I'm
You
going to take
totally
that
should.
And it makes sense because sometimes when I would be face down in my muesli, I'd have a big old bowl of muesli after I already ate lunch and have a handful of chocolate chips. So then it's 4:30, it's 5, I'm supposed to be making dinner for the family. And sometimes I would either A, not be super motivated to make dinner, or B, like eat a little bit of dinner, but not like a full meal, and then be hungry again because I'm trying to make up for something that, you know what I mean? Like this overeating. So there's this imbalance that starts.
Right. So rather than start with, am I hungry? And just going down a rabbit hole with how hungry am I? Where am I on the scale? What are the symptoms I am experiencing? Like, do I deserve to eat yet? Like if it's mealtime, just have a meal. So there's a couple of ways that I teach people to start working with the idea of meals and like building a structure for themselves. And it depends kind of like on how compulsive the whole thing feels and how tight, but basically the idea is that a meal it's got a beginning and a middle and crucially an end. Like at some point you stop eating and then there's a gap between that meal and your next meal. So it's not like, an undifferentiated, massive grazing all day long. So that is the first thing that I teach people. Have meals. Don't worry about how hungry you are. Don't worry about how full you are. Like, make a plan and stick to it, and you don't have to earn it like you're human. And, the idea that this is a popular idea. Intuitive eating would say, your body knows what you need, and it knows when you need it, and it knows when to stop. And all you need to do is listen to it. But if you come from an eating culture that's really disrupted, and your own eating is really chaotic and disrupted, this is my experience with my clients. Like, they can go a long time trying to figure out hunger signals. And the truth is that our hunger hormones respond to regular meal times by regulating themselves. It takes a lot longer the other way around. So this is why I say you just apply this. Let's start here. Apply this simple mechanical fix. Let's get your eating on a sort of schedule. Like, it can be flexible. It doesn't have to be like military drill precision. We're not talking about that. But like something that's sort of predictable that your body can get behind.
Count on. Yeah.
And that will cut out almost all of the panicky survival eating that we get into if, say, we're in a diet binge cycle. Like, if we feel guilty about how much we've eaten and we like clamp down hard, put some restrictions on, set up a bunch of rules and guidelines, and, rope off entire areas of the grocery store and etc., then we'll go eventually. And for some people, like, I don't know, my record is probably about 10 minutes on a diet, and we're face down in the whatever, the muesli, right. And then we move on to the ice cream, or the other way around. And then it's the third thing and the fourth thing and whatever.
Right.
So if there's that cycle going on, just eating regular meals will take care of most of that. And then there's a habit that has to be broken.
I love this. And it's kind of like, I think it's really interesting because, intuition, which, I think about intuition all the time, or, really being connected to our inner knowing, is something that, well, especially in coaching, I'm always encouraging my clients to do, and like always just pay attention to that little inner voice. And really, I think it's very powerful. But there's also this sort of, it's a razor's edge, right? Because on the other side of that, I think what is also really helpful is having structure. Structure also supports us. So there's sort of like, almost like right brain, left brain, and I've learned that, as wild and passionate and like creative as I am, sometimes it doesn't necessarily serve me to just do everything on a whim, eat on a schedule that is like very whim filled. Like, oh, now I'll have 16 almonds and now I'll have some music, just letting me follow my intuition about my food. What I've learned is very similar, that when I set up a structure and I follow that structure, I begin to learn that I can trust myself to do what I said I was going to do. Mm-hmm. Not only with eating, but with writing, whatever it is, like structure serves us.
Well, if you get the right structure, and intuition will help a lot with that, right?
Yeah. Talk about the right kind of structure. And the bird is going crazy right now. She apparently wants to say something about the structure.
Oh, well, okay. Let's I'm kidding around for that. I think so. Trying various structures randomly can also take a long time to hit on something that will work. But the collective human wisdom, and this is why I think it's so kind of goofy to talk about intuition in terms of eating. Like, babies don't, if they're feral babies living in the forest, I guess, I don't know what they would do. But human babies live in human families who live in human cultures, and they have food cultures, and they're raised with the collective human wisdom around food. And some of that is like, a diet of straight Fruit Loops is probably not a good idea. Like, let's get you some protein in the morning. Like, here's what we eat in the morning because we've worked it out over the millennia. This is good for you, right?
Right.
Then you start having access to better thinking, right? As you're hormones get regulated, and you've got some vegetables and some protein on board, and not just muesli and chocolate chips, right? Your thinking
Yes.
clears up a lot, and then you can start making better decisions, and it's a cycle of virtue, like as opposed to the diet binge cycle, which is just vicious cycle, right?
Love it. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, when I think of structure, I think of like looking around. What are people doing that's working, that's worked for, millennia? Well,
Yeah.
meals is kind of like a big one, you know?
Yeah.
Feasting is another one. That works for people too. Like it's actually good to goose the metabolism with a feast once in a while, but proportion is that we don't do that every day. If you eat at restaurants every day, you're feasting all the time. That's like fancy holiday party food, right? Super
Right.
rich food. But that in traditional cultures is something that, I mean, we just wouldn't have had the resources for. It
Right.
necessarily was very limited.
Rare and special.
Rare
Yeah.
and special.
Hmm.
Yes.
And I love that. I can't help but draw another analogy to writers. So, like, I've studied, when I was trying to figure out, well, how do people write a book, or how people, how do people who are really creative that I admire, how do they do what they do? And there's a wonderful book about that, The Habits of Creative People, that I read, where it was like all these, and of course I can't think of it right in this moment.
Is it Twyla Tharp? Is that the
No,
book?
but that's another wonderful. I have read that book too. It's another one that studies like all kinds of historical figures, and it was very interesting.
Oh.
Some people have these very dysfunctional schedules. Like, remember, one of the writers is like, first thing she did is like smoke approximately a pack and a half of cigarettes, climb into bed, drink about a half of a bottle of bourbon, and then around 2 o'clock, that's when she would hit her music writing time, and then she would write, and this was, recollected through, reports from other people and her own self, whatever. There were other people that had a very like, from sunrise till 9 a.m. They would work steady for 4 hours every day. Then they would break for lunch and go to the movies in the afternoon with friends, and that seemed a lot more balanced. Like, that person seems like, that sounds like a more fun schedule. So whatever it is you're feeling, unregulated about, like, study the people who it appears to you, seem to have a good handle on it and seem to have a beautiful life or balance somehow. I think,
Balance, I think, is the key, right?
yeah,
Like who's walking the middle way?
yeah, yeah. Because, right, these extremes, there were also examples in there that there were some famous creative people that their entire life revolved around one thing, writing symphonies, let's just say. And that's all they did. And reading their life story was like, oof, like, I mean, from dusk to dawn and all evening, and they
Yeah.
would stop for meals and maybe 20 minutes of calisthenics to keep them from, like, not, completely imploding physically. And I remember reading those and feeling that felt really restrictive, but that was their life. But it wasn't the middle way. That's for
That's
sure.
kind of like the hollow bone being the channel. Like I've got to get this thing out of me, and being kind of a servant to the gods and forces of nature. And it isn't a life that I would want for myself.
Yeah. I mean, maybe hollow bone for 4 or 5 hours a day. That sounds pretty sweet, but not 18 hours a day.
Yeah.
So, okay. And I have one more question before we wrap up. And I forgot to surprise you, or forgot to tell you I was going to surprise you with this. What is your favorite wild animal lately? Or is there a special wild animal that inspires you, somehow in your work, your life?
I have a lot of favorite animals. The tiger is the one that I come back to at the end of the day. Like my whole life, it's been, and the tiger isn't my spirit animal, or that it's just the kind of the animal that, like, I might cry actually. I love tigers so much. I love them so much.
Yeah. And I always say, when people like burst into tears talking about a particular animal, it's like, I mean, it just reminds me like our souls are touched. There's a wonderful video. Maybe you've seen it. It's like a celebrity whose boyfriend brings her a sloth.
Yes,
Have
so
you
I've
seen
watched that
that?
100 times. I love her. I
And I
love
just
that
remember
thing.
thinking, I was so glad they shared that because it was very vulnerable, but she basically just completely lost it when this sloth appeared in her home, like by surprise, which we could go into all the animal welfare and whatnot about all that. But
also she knew. She knew. He's like, there's a surprise. It's a sloth.
she
I
knew.
just know it.
Yeah. And
Like
just
she
how
felt the
powerful
sloth.
that
It was
is. And there's something just
amazing.
so,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's how I feel
Well,
about tigers. Also baby elephants. Like I can't
mm,
see a baby elephant without blubbing.
well, and I'm so grateful for tigers because, like, a long time ago when I first just left medicine and I was kind of just trying to figure out my stuff, and I was so exhausted from like trying to do too many things and be everywhere doing everything. And I remember this tiger showing up on a shamanic journey, it just really out of the blue, total surprise, this giant tiger. And it was like, whoa. And it was just like, you need to like step away from social media, and if you can like disappear from view, like big leaps will be possible for you. You need to stop, doing all that.
Mm,
And it was the best thing because at that time I felt like it was a time when a lot
wow.
of people were asking me about spirit animals and all that, and I felt like I needed to respond to everybody because other to not respond wouldn't be nice or wouldn't be responsible. He was just like, mm-mm. It's like tigers, they're just like, they're very quiet, they're just
Mm.
scratching on trees. He's like, you can scratch on a tree every once in a while, let people know you're around, but like just disappear, it's okay. And that was just what I needed at that time because I just needed to retreat for a while. So I'm grateful for tigers, and they're just amazing, amazing creatures. Well,
Mm.
Max Daniels, where can people find you? And please, if you're listening to this and you're enjoying this, subscribe to Max's newsletter. It's such a treasure every time I get it. It's beautiful. It's
Thank
so
you.
well written. She's hilarious, and oh, they're so good.
I try to make people laugh.
It's so important when we're doing hard things to know that you can to laugh.
Well, so they can find me at maxdaniels.com. Yep,
And
and
you offer one-on-one coaching.
I do. And you can find that at maxdaniels.com/BOK, which stands for Body of Knowledge, which is what we build together in our one-on-one coaching. And my newsletter comes out weekly. I write a monthly self-care column for Mason Dixon Knitting. And that's
Oh,
masondixonknitting.com. And that's where you can find me.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Max, for being here. It was a
Thank
pure
you, Sarah.
delight.
Super fun. So glad we got to catch up.
Onward with our mechanical structure. We shall triumph.